This isn't just a story, it's a cinematic journey of betrayal, loss, and ultimate justice, where every secret revealed brings us closer to a shocking truth and a powerful ending. From heartbreak to redemption, it proves that even in the darkest chapters, the truth has a way of rising and rewriting the ending. If you love intense, real-life drama like this, don't forget to like and share to support the channel and fuel more stories like this. Thanks for watching.
Imagine a billionaire trying to strangle his pregnant wife live on the internet. 42 million people witnessed the attack in real time. This nightmare unfolded in a crowded ballroom at a charity gala with hundreds of guests frozen in shock. She was 8 months pregnant with their child. The whole horrible scene was captured on security cameras. But what she did next is what stunned the world. She did not scream for help. She did not try to run away. Instead, she just pulled out her phone, hit record, and said his name. That one quiet act of defiance was the beginning of the end for his billion-dollar empire. This is the amazing story of a woman who was told, "You belong to me." She decided in that instant that he would never have power over her again. This story holds a powerful truth. The cage she thought she was trapped in was never actually locked. She had the key the entire time. The moment she chose to save herself without waiting for permission, she became free. If you or anyone you love feels trapped or silenced, remember that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of incredible strength. This story is not just about getting through a terrible ordeal. It is about taking back your name, your voice, and your life. It is the proof that all the money in the world cannot protect a monster from the truth. This story also reminds us that one person's courage can end a pattern of abuse that has haunted a family for generations. If this story has touched you, please share a comment to support others who need to hear this message. Liking this video helps it reach a wider audience. Sharing it might be the lifeline for someone who is suffering alone and searching for a sign of hope. And if you want to hear more stories of bravery like this one, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Great stories can inspire real change. Let us make that change happen together. The only thing breaking the silence in the hospital room was the steady, gentle beep of the heart monitor. Tori's eyes fluttered open. The world felt like a strange, confusing fog. Nothing seemed real. The overhead lights were too bright, and the room had a sharp chemical smell. A raw, burning sensation tore through her throat, like she had tried to swallow fire. "My baby," she breathed, the words escaping before she was even fully awake. "Is my baby okay?" A kind-faced woman with thin, wire-rimmed glasses looked down at her. It was Dr. Sarah Hoffman. Tori vaguely recognized her doctor through the blur. "Your daughter is perfectly safe, Tori." Dr. Hoffman gently glided a cool ultrasound wand across Tori's belly. A nearby monitor lit up, showing the beautiful, curled shape of a tiny baby, completely safe and sound. You, on the other hand, were the victim of a very serious assault. Tori slowly lifted her hand to her neck. A sharp, searing pain made her flinch as her fingertips brushed against her skin. The bruises were hot and swollen. She found herself tracing their edges over and over. She could not make her hand stop, as if she needed to confirm that the awful dream was real, that the man she loved had wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed until her world went black. Just then, she felt a powerful kick from her baby against her ribs. It was a strong and reassuring thump. Tori let out a long, shaky breath. Her daughter was fine. They had both made it through. "Mrs. Ashford, there are 2 detectives here who would like to speak with you," Dr. Hoffman said, her voice a mix of compassion and professionalism. "Do you feel strong enough to answer a few questions?" Tori managed a small nod. Even that simple movement sent a wave of pain through her neck. 2 strangers stepped into the room. One was a woman in her 50s with short, silver hair and very sharp, watchful eyes. The other was a younger man with a tired expression, clutching a notepad. The woman moved a chair to the side of the bed while her partner placed a small digital recorder on the nightstand. "Mrs. Ashford, my name is Detective Martinez, and this is my partner, Detective Brooks. We need to ask you some questions about what happened at the Children's Cancer Gala last night." The older detective's voice was official, but it held an undertone of kindness. "Could you tell us what you remember, in your own words?" "Last night. The gala." Tori's mind was filled with scattered, flashing images like snapshots from a camera. She remembered the polished marble floors and the glittering crystal lights. She could almost hear the distant music of the orchestra. And then she saw Derek's face, twisted into a mask of pure fury. She saw his hands coming for her. "I don't," she started, then had to pause to swallow against the pain. "It all happened so fast." "Please, take all the time you need," Detective Martinez said gently. Tori closed her eyes, but a terrible, sinking feeling came over her. Everybody saw it. She was attacked in a room filled with hundreds of people. The entire charity gala was filled with cameras and witnesses. There was no way to hide what had happened. There was no way to make an excuse. She could not pretend that she tripped or walked into a door or that it was all just a big misunderstanding. "We have statements from 17 people who witnessed the attack," Detective Brooks said in a low voice, "and the venue's security cameras captured the entire event." Tori's eyes flew open. Tears that she did not even know were there began to stream down her face. At that precise moment, the hospital room door was thrown open with a loud crash. A man who looked to be in his early 60s stormed into the room. He had a wild mane of salt and pepper hair, and his expensive shirt was pulled out of his pants. James Caldwell froze the instant he saw his daughter lying in that hospital bed. The color drained from his face, then returned in an angry red wave, before finally hardening into a look of absolute cold finality. The last expression was the one that scared Tori the most. She had never seen her father look like that before. It was not simple anger. It was something far colder. It was the look of something ending. For good. "Baby girl?" The two words sounded broken. Tori could not recall the last time her father had used that name for her. It had been years. It was from a time long before she married Derek. It was from a time before she became Mrs. Ashford and left her old life behind her. "Daddy," she managed to whisper. "He did it right there in front of everyone. I just don't understand." James walked to her bedside and took her hand, being careful of the intravenous line. His grip was warm and powerful. It felt real. She held on to him, feeling like he was the only thing keeping her from floating away. "I am ending this," he said. It was not a promise. It was a declaration of fact, as sure as the morning sun. The two detectives shared a knowing glance and quietly started to pack up their things. "We will return at a later time," Detective Martinez said. "You should get some rest, Mrs. Ashford." When they were gone, the only sound was the steady ping of the heart monitor. James just stood there, holding his daughter's hand and staring at the horrible, dark bruises on her neck. A muscle in his jaw twitched again and again, but his face remained a stone mask. He did not have to say a word. Tori could see everything she needed in his eyes. A new person appeared in the doorway. It was Rebecca Morrison, Tori's best friend from college, holding a tablet. Her face was stained with dark streaks of ruined makeup, and her usually perfect hair was a mess. "Tori," Becca's voice trembled. "Oh goodness, I am so sorry. I hate that I'm the one showing you this, but you have to see it. It's gone viral." She took a few hesitant steps toward the bed and held out the tablet. "Someone leaked it online 4 hours ago. It is on every single news site. Everyone is sharing the video." Tori's hands shook as she accepted the tablet. A video was already playing. It was the raw security footage from the gala. The image was grainy and black and white, but the details were terribly clear. The camera was aimed down a hallway just off the main ballroom floor. Tori watched herself walk into the frame, one hand resting on her pregnant stomach, moving gracefully in her ball gown. A second later, Derek entered the picture behind her, looking perfect in his tuxedo. His expression, however, was one of pure, unrestrained rage. Tori watched her own image on the screen as she turned to face him. There was no sound, but she remembered every cruel word he had said. His hands shot towards her, his fingers wrapped around her throat, and he began to squeeze. On the small screen, her eyes grew wide with panic. Her mouth formed a silent scream. Her pregnant belly was obvious as she fought against him, but he only tightened his grip. Her hands scrabbled at his wrists as her knees started to buckle. Then, two waiters suddenly ran into the hall. They grabbed Derek's arms and wrenched him off her. He finally let go. His face held no regret, it held only fury. The video stopped. Underneath the clip, one number glowed in bright red. 42 million views. The tablet slipped from Tori's fingers and fell onto the bedsheets. She could not seem to get her hands to stop shaking. "There is more," Becca said in a quiet, pained voice. "His lawyers released a statement an hour ago." She picked up the tablet and pulled up a news report. The article showed a photo of Derek's lawyer standing on the front steps of their mansion, addressing a crowd of reporters. "Mr. Ashford wishes to express his deepest apologies for the unfortunate disagreement that occurred last evening," the lawyer said, reading from a piece of paper dot model. The hospital television was showing a news story that painted her husband as a hero. In a serious tone, the reporter said Derek Ashford was devoted to supporting his family through their ordeal. Tori's father held her hand, his grip strong and comforting. The camera then focused on Derek's mother, Margaret Ashford, who was dressed in a tasteful cream suit with costly pearl earrings. Her expression was calm, perfectly portraying a dignified and worried mother. Margaret dabbed a tissue at her eyes, but they were completely dry. "This pregnancy has been so stressful for Tori," she said. "We were concerned for her emotional well-being. Derek was under immense pressure caring for her. They were already twisting the narrative. They were making her out to be the villain. She was the unstable wife, the hysterical pregnant woman who was impossible to manage." Beside her bed, Tori's phone started to ring on the small table. The screen displayed private number. She stared at it. It rang a fourth time, and then a fifth. Her father started to reach for it, but Tori snatched it first. She accepted the call and held the phone to her ear. "Victoria, it is time to come home," Derek said. His voice was even and measured, the same one he used in board meetings. It was the voice that deceived everyone. He went on. "We will act as though this never occurred. I will inform the press that it was all a simple misunderstanding. We can put this behind us." Tori's hand instinctively rose to her neck, feeling the sore bruises that lay there. "No," she whispered. His voice immediately turned icy and severe. "I am sorry. I could not hear you. What was that?" "I said no." There was a dead silence on the line. Then she heard a brief, cold laugh that sounded like cracking ice. "You do not tell me no, Victoria. I own you, and I own that child inside you. You will return home, or I will ensure you lose everything you hold dear." The call ended. Tori slowly put her hand down. She looked over at her father and her best friend, who both wore the same expression. It was a mixture of profound concern and suppressed rage. "I am not going back," Tori declared. Her voice was steady and resolute now. Something inside her had shifted when Derek spoke those words. When he said, "I own you," a piece of her shattered. But in its place, something far stronger began to grow. "I will never set foot in that house again." Her father bent down and placed a soft kiss on her forehead. "You will never have to," he vowed. "I give you my word." After Becca went to find some coffee, her father left the room to make a few phone calls. For the first time since she had woken up, Tori was completely alone. She picked up her phone and gazed at the screen for a second. Then she opened the App Store. She searched for an application that could record phone calls. She found one and installed it. Then she ran a test to confirm it worked without any issues. She did all of this by herself. She did not ask for help from anyone. She did not wait for her father or a lawyer to make the suggestion. She just did it with quiet and careful purpose. Tori knew that Derek would call her again. He always needed to get the last word. He had to prove that he was the one in control. This time, however, she was going to be ready for him. This time, his own words would become the weapon she would use to bring him down. Tori placed her phone back on the small table. She put both hands on her stomach, feeling a gentle kick from her baby girl. "We are going to be all right," she whispered to her child. "I am not sure how right now, but I promise you that we will be all right." Next to her, the heart monitor beeped with a powerful, consistent rhythm. The rain that had been threatening to fall all day finally started. It tapped softly against the hospital window. Miles away, in a multi-million-dollar luxury apartment, Derek Ashford poured himself a glass of whiskey. He was speaking with his team of lawyers. He felt completely confident that his wife would soon be pleading for him to take her back. He had no idea what was about to happen to him. This was all taking place 6 hours before the ambulance was called. It was 6 hours before the security footage was released to the world. It was 6 hours before 42 million people watched her husband attempt to murder her. Tori was standing inside her enormous walk-in closet, trying to decide on a dress. The Children's Cancer Gala was one of the most important charity functions of the year. She had been excited about it for months. But that was before she had lost her passion for those kinds of events. That was when she still felt like herself. Derek's voice echoed from the bedroom. "Are you ready?" he shouted. "We are going to be late." Tori selected a dark blue maternity dress with long sleeves and a high neckline. It was a simple and comfortable option for a woman who was 8 months pregnant. Her back was in constant pain. Her ankles were perpetually swollen. She had not had a good night's sleep in weeks. Suddenly, Derek was standing in the closet doorway. He was already dressed in his tuxedo, a custom-made suit that cost more than most people's annual rent. He glanced at the dress in her hand, and his expression tightened. "You look enormous in that," he said sharply. "Pick something else." "Derek, I am 8 months pregnant. I am supposed to be enormous." His eyes narrowed and a chill filled the air. "Do not talk back to me. Just find another dress." Tori returned the blue dress to the hanger. Her hands started to tremble. She was all too familiar with this mood. She saw the tension around his eyes and heard the cold sting in his voice. She noticed the way he clenched his jaw. After 3 years of marriage, she recognized these signs well. They were the silent alarms before a storm. She took out a black dress, but it seemed too depressing. A red one felt too flashy. A gray one was just too dull. "Victoria, for goodness sake," Derek said as he stepped into the closet. The smell of his expensive cologne was so overpowering it was hard to breathe. "This is not that hard. Just choose a dress." Tori flinched at his cruel tone. She grabbed a champagne-colored gown and held it up for him. It was a classic and elegant dress. It would photograph well without drawing too much attention. Derek looked at it for a moment before giving a sharp nod. "That will do. Now get ready." Then he turned and left. Tori's hands shook as she slipped on the champagne dress. It took her 3 attempts to get the zipper up over her pregnant belly. When she saw her reflection in the mirror, she did not know the person staring back. She saw tired, hollow eyes and a smile that was stiff and fake. It felt as if a stranger was wearing her face. She was once a person of significance. She was Victoria Caldwell, the founder of a charity that provided quality education to underprivileged children. She even used to compete in marathons. In fact, she was training for her 4th one when she met Derek at a benefit dinner. He was incredibly charming and magnetic that evening. He had a gift for making a woman feel as if she were the only person in the world. She should have realized his charm was just a beautifully crafted cage. It always is. The drive to the gala was completely silent. The driver navigated the city traffic with skill. Derek was absorbed in his phone. Tori simply looked out the dark window, watching the city lights blur into streaks as they drove past. She rested a hand on her belly and felt her daughter squirm. The kicks were powerful and lively. "I am so sorry," she thought to her unborn child. "I am so sorry that he is your father." The car door swung open, and Derek's hand immediately gripped Tori's elbow, steering her onto the pavement. In the bright flash of camera bulbs, he played the part of the flawless billionaire husband, gently assisting his pregnant wife. But Tori felt the harsh reality. His fingers squeezed her arm with painful force, a silent promise of the bruise that would form later. Through a smile designed for the cameras, he hissed, "Smile! At least act like you are happy to be here." And so Tori smiled. The photographers captured a beautiful lie. Mrs. Derek Ashford, pregnant, stunning, and beaming with joy. She was the perfect wife for a man with his influence. The next day, those pictures would be everywhere, promoting a fantasy of the perfect marriage. But no camera could capture what took place behind their closed doors. Inside the massive ballroom, huge crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant glow over everything. Hundreds of the city's wealthiest citizens mingled and chatted. Women wore gowns that cost more than a new car. Men in tailored suits drank champagne that cost more per glass than a week of groceries for most people. If you were anybody who mattered, you were in this room. Then Margaret Ashford, Derek's mother, glided over to them. She was a spectacle in a white silk gown adorned with an astonishing amount of diamonds. Every hair on her head was perfectly in place. A flawless, painted smile graced her lips, but the warmth never reached her cold, critical eyes. Margaret leaned close, her lips just brushing the air near Tori's cheek. "Darling, you look," she began, her eyes scanning Tori from head to toe. Her gaze lingered for a second, as if she were taking a mental inventory of every single flaw. Absolutely glowing. The compliment felt like an insult. Tori knew exactly what Margaret was really saying. "You look fat. You are an embarrassment. You will never be worthy of my son." "Thank you, Margaret," Tori replied, her voice soft. She had learned years ago that arguing only gave them more weapons to use against her. Derek's hand was a steel clamp on her elbow, maneuvering her through the room. He dictated who she talked to, and for how long. She was not a guest at this party. She was just a beautiful object on his arm. Then, across the bustling room, Tori saw a familiar face. For the first time all night, a real smile touched her lips, and it was Marcus Webb, a journalist she had known years before. It felt like another lifetime, back when she managed her own charity, had her own career, and was her own woman. That night, I saw a ghost from a time when I was still Victoria Caldwell. "Marcus!" I heard myself call out, raising a hand in a happy wave before I could even think. He walked toward us with a warm, familiar smile. He was in his late 30s, with these incredibly smart, observant eyes that saw everything. "Tori, it has been way too long. How have you been?" "I am doing great. Everything is just wonderful," I said. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth as I tried to ignore the sharp, biting pain from my husband Derek's fingers digging into my arm. Have you ever had to put on a smile while someone was hurting you right in public? Let me know in the comments below. For just a moment, I wanted to feel like myself again. "So, how is the world of journalism treating you?" I asked him. "It is never dull. I'm actually working on a huge corporate fraud story right now. I am digging up some really shocking stuff." Marcus's eyes then drifted down to my very pregnant belly. "So, when are you due?" "Only 6 more weeks to go. We are having a girl." "That is fantastic news. Do you think you will ever return to your charity work after she arrives?" My heart did a little flutter. It was the first time in what felt like a lifetime that someone asked about my passions, about my life. He did not ask about baby names or Derek's latest business deal. He asked what Victoria Caldwell wanted. Maybe. I have been thinking about it. There is so much that still needs to be done for youth education, and I really do miss that work. "My wife is getting tired." Derek's voice sliced through the air. He was suddenly right beside me like a dark storm cloud, his smile razor thin. It was the smile he always put on right before he flew into a rage. You know how it is with pregnancy. She gets a little confused and says the most foolish things. "Actually, I was just explaining," I tried to say. But Derek's hand moved from my elbow up to my arm. His fingers dug in hard, a silent promise of the agony that would come later. He squeezed with such force that a tiny, sharp breath escaped my lips, but no one else heard it. "You will have to excuse us, Marcus. It was good to see you." With that, he yanked me away from the conversation so fast that I stumbled. My pregnant body was already off balance, and I almost fell to the floor. Derek did not slow down. He did not even look back at me. "I need to use the restroom," I said through a clenched jaw as soon as we were away from the crowd. "Fine, but do not take too long." I walked quickly through the guests, looking for the quiet hallway that led to the bathrooms. The noise of the party slowly faded with every step I took. My heels made a soft clicking sound on the polished marble floor. The hallway was a silent escape, the party's loud noise muffled by the thick walls. I rushed into the restroom and locked myself inside a stall, my hands shaking so badly I could not control them. I took long, deep breaths, trying to slow my racing heart. Inside me, the baby kicked over and over as if she could feel her mother's terror. "It is all going to be okay," I whispered, rubbing my belly in slow, calming circles. "We are going to be fine." But the words felt empty. I had not believed them myself for a very long time. After a minute, I left the stall to wash my hands and stared at myself in the mirror. My makeup was flawless. My hair was styled perfectly. The gorgeous designer dress completely hid the ugly purple bruise that was already starting to form on my arm. To everyone else, I looked like the perfect, happy wife. I always did. When I stepped back into the hallway, Derek was waiting for me. My stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. He was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. His bow tie was a little crooked. He had been drinking and drinking heavily. I could see it in the glassy look in his eyes and the tense way he held himself. "You made me look like a fool," he said. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. "Chatting with that reporter about your silly little career, as if you have any idea what you are talking about." "I was just being polite, Derek. He is an old friend." "I do not care who he is. You are not allowed to have your own thoughts in public. You are not allowed to have an opinion that is different from mine. And you are certainly not allowed to talk about that worthless little charity of yours as if it ever meant anything." "I was not disagreeing with you. I was just—" "Shut up." He closed the space between us in one fast step. His large body blocked the light from the hall. He stood 6 feet and 2 inches tall and weighed at least 80 pounds more than me. And I was 8 months pregnant, my body swollen and clumsy. I had never felt so small and so completely trapped. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is," he snarled, "to have a wife who cannot keep her mouth shut, who still thinks she is somebody?" "Derek, please, people are right in the next room. They might hear us." His hand shot out like a viper and wrapped around my throat. My head slammed hard against the cold marble wall. The force of the blow knocked the air right out of my lungs. The crystals on the chandelier above seemed to spin, throwing wild shadows on the walls. Derek's fingers squeezed my windpipe, not slowly, but with instant, brutal force. I could not breathe. I clawed at his hands, my fingernails digging into his skin. My feet slipped on the slick floor as I tried to push him off of me. My baby started kicking furiously inside me, a frantic, terrified response to the attack. Derek's face was just inches from mine, his breath smelling of whiskey and pure anger. His eyes looked like 2 dark, empty holes. "You are nothing without me," he hissed, squeezing even harder. My vision started to go blurry at the edges. Black spots danced in front of my eyes, growing bigger and bigger, threatening to swallow me whole. My knees started to give out, but his strong hand held me pinned against the wall like a trapped animal. "This is how I am going to die," I thought. "I am going to die in a marble hallway at a fancy party, 8 months pregnant, in a dress my husband chose for me, and his awful face will be the very last thing I ever see." Then, all of a sudden, I heard shouting. There was the sound of running feet, of dress shoes slapping against the stone floor. "Hey, get your hands off of her. Somebody call 911. 2 young waiters in clean white jackets appeared out of nowhere. They grabbed Derek's arms and pulled him away from me with all their strength. His grip finally broke. I slid down the wall and collapsed on the floor, gasping and choking, trying to get air. Every single breath felt like fire in my throat. My hands automatically went to my stomach to protect my baby. The baby kicked. Thank God the baby was still moving. My baby was okay. A tiny survivor, just like her mother. A big crowd of people now crowded the hallway. One person was yelling into a phone, calling for an ambulance. Someone else was taking pictures, their flash lighting up the horrible scene. 3 men were fighting to hold Derek back. His face was twisted with absolute rage. He did not look sorry or ashamed at all. He was just furious that they had stopped him. My eyes were full of tears, but I looked up. I saw Margaret Ashford at the edge of the crowd. It was Derek's mother. Her phone was in her hand, held up right in front of her. She was recording the whole thing. She was not calling for help. She was not running to help her son or me. She was just filming the entire awful attack. She filmed me on the floor and her son being held back. For a terrible second, our eyes met. Margaret's expression was cold and completely blank. It was the look of a woman who had seen this happen before, and she had decided a long time ago to do nothing but watch. Margaret calmly slid her phone back into her purse. And then, everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed. It was a familiar feeling. The bright morning sun was shining into the room. It made long, hopeful stripes of light across the floor. The steady beep of the heart monitor was not a peaceful sound. It was the rhythm of a fight for survival. Each beep was a match for the dull, throbbing pain in my throat. I could feel the baby stir inside me, a gentle movement that reminded me of the new life I had to protect. In a chair next to the hospital bed, my father, James, was not asleep. He was just staring down at his hands as if he did not know whose they were. His shirt was a mess of wrinkles, his hair was all over the place, and dark circles were under his eyes. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a single night. "Dad," I whispered, my voice all rough and scratchy. His head snapped up and his eyes were bloodshot and swollen. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I feel like I got into a fight with a truck and the truck won," I managed to say. Even trying to smile sent a shock of pain through my bruised face. "How long have you been here?" "All night," he answered. "I was not going to leave you here all by yourself." I tried to reach for the glass of water on the nightstand. My father was faster. He put the glass in my hand, his own large, steady hand covering mine to stop it from shaking. The cool water felt good on my raw throat. "The police stopped by," James said quietly. "They wanted to ask you some more questions. I told them to come back later. You need to rest." I set the glass down. I had been fading in and out of sleep for what felt like an eternity. In the clear moments in between, I had been playing this very conversation over and over in my head. She had practiced the words in her mind 100 times, knowing she could not keep the secret any longer. "Dad, I need to tell you something." "Okay," he replied. But the heaviness in her voice signaled that this was not a simple conversation. James became perfectly still. His hands, which had been resting loosely on his lap, tightened into pale, bloodless fists. He seemed to be holding his breath. Every muscle in his body coiled like a wire pulled too tight. "What is this about, Tori?" She met his gaze directly, a strange calm washing over her, now that the moment was finally here. For 3 long years, she had carried this burden. To finally let it go felt like putting down an impossible weight. "I just need you to hear me out," she said softly. "Please, just let me tell you the whole story, right from the start." James's answer came out as a tight, strained whisper. "I am listening." "It began about 6 months after Derek and I got married," Tori started. Getting the first few words out was the hardest part, but then the rest came pouring out of her. "I asked him to join me at the big annual gala for my charity. It was my most important event of the year, something I had worked on for months. I was so proud of what we had accomplished. But when I asked Derek to come, he said he was too busy. I tried to make him understand how much his support would mean to me." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He then picked up his phone and threw it against the wall. It just exploded. Tiny pieces of glass flew everywhere." Tori shut her eyes, the image still sharp in her memory. He just stood there, staring at the shattered phone on the floor. Then he turned to me and said, "Now look at the mess you made me make." "And what did you do?" James asked. His voice was flat and empty, the sound of a man using all his will to remain calm. "I cleaned up the glass," she replied. "I told him I was sorry. I convinced myself that he was just under a lot of stress at work. I made an excuse for him and I pretended it would never happen again." "When was the next time?" Tori kept her eyes closed. It was easier to speak into the darkness than to see the pain she was causing her father. "It was about 3 months after that. I wanted to visit you for Christmas. Derek was insistent that we had to spend the holiday with his mother. I suggested we could divide the time, maybe spend Christmas Eve with Margaret, and drive over here on Christmas morning." She hesitated, the memory catching in her throat. He punched a hole clean through the wall right beside my head. If I'd been standing just 6 inches to the left, he would have hit me. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filled the silence. Outside, a light rain began to drum against the window. In our 2nd year of marriage, the things he threw got closer to me. Once it was a glass of water that shattered on the kitchen floor right next to my feet. Another time it was a dinner plate that hit the counter and broke right by my hand. He was never aiming for me, but I knew. With every incident, he was getting a little bit closer. And every single time he would say the exact same words. "Look what you made me do." "Did you tell anyone what was happening?" James asked. "I told Becca one time," Tori confessed. She told me I needed to pack a bag and leave him that same day. I got so angry with her for saying that. I told her she didn't understand our life. I said that every marriage has its problems and Derek was just dealing with a lot of pressure. I told her I just had to be a better wife. Tori opened her eyes and looked at her dad. I refused to speak to Becca for 3 months after that argument. Derek was thrilled we weren't talking. He told me she was a bad influence. He said she was just jealous of what we had. He made me believe she wanted to destroy our happiness. James suddenly stood up from the chair. He walked over to the window and stared out at the rain, his back turned to her. His hands were clenched so hard that his knuckles were white. His powerful shoulders were shaking. What happened in the 3rd year? He asked. His voice was thick with emotion, but he would not face her. He twisted my wrist during an argument, she said, her voice now a faint whisper. He just grabbed it and bent it back until I heard a pop. He swore it was an accident, that he didn't realize how tight his grip was. I had to wear a brace for 2 weeks. I told everyone I fell on the stairs. I even gave Dr. Hoffman that same story. Tori rested a hand on her pregnant stomach. This happened just before I found out I was pregnant. James's voice was low and heavy with a sadness that sounded like it was breaking him. And you hoped a baby would change him? I thought it might calm him down, she admitted. I hoped it would give him something to focus on besides his career, and me, and all the ways I kept disappointing him. A small, bitter laugh escaped her. I have never been a stupid woman, Dad, but I was so aware of how stupid I was being. Does that make any sense to you? Yes, James said, his voice choked with emotion. It makes perfect sense. The whole story came rushing out then, unstoppable. I had a reason for everything, for every broken dish, for every hole in the wall. Every time he grabbed my arm too hard or his words cut me down, I found an excuse. It was the stress, his family, the pressure he was under. And it was always my fault. I was not pretty enough or thin enough or quiet enough. The pregnancy made it all 1,000 times worse. He hated the way my body was changing. He hated that I was tired all the time. He hated that I could not drink at his work parties or fit into the dresses he liked. He said I was letting myself go. He called me his embarrassment. Did he ever strike you with a closed fist before last night? Not with his fist, she corrected him. But he would grab me, he would shove me, he would squeeze my arms until they were covered in dark, purple bruises. Tori's voice was barely a sound. I learned to cover them with long sleeves and thick makeup, she continued. About a month ago, he shoved me into the kitchen counter. The impact was so severe, it stole all the air from my lungs. For a full minute, I could not breathe. I saw Dr. Hoffman and claimed I tripped over our cat. The problem with that story is that we do not have a cat. James finally stopped staring out the window. Tears streamed down his face, but his expression was not one of sorrow. It was something else entirely. His features were cold, rigid, and lit by a powerful new fire. I should have seen it, he said, his voice thick with rage. I should have known what he was doing to you. I did not want you to know. Derek was an expert at keeping me isolated. If I ever made plans with you, he would manufacture a crisis to make me cancel. A last-minute business trip, a client dinner he could not miss, his mother showing up unannounced. There was always an excuse. When did we last have lunch, just us? Tori had to think for a while. The only sounds in the room were the rain tapping on the glass and the steady beep of the heart monitor. It was right before my wedding, 3 years ago. James shut his eyes tightly. 3 whole years. His little girl had been suffering in this prison for 3 years and he had been completely unaware. He was so busy growing his company. He was so lost in his own world that he missed every single clue. The lunches she constantly canceled, the long-sleeved blouses she wore in the middle of summer. He never noticed the way she would slightly recoil when Derek touched her. It was a faint, nearly imperceptible motion that you would only see if you were searching for it. And he was never searching. I am going to fix this, my darling girl. I give you my word, he whispered. But how can you? He is a billionaire, Dad. He is surrounded by lawyers and public relations people. He knows every influential person in the city. James moved to the edge of her bed and held his daughter's hand. And I have $800 million and 3 decades of my own relationships. I know every investor, every board member, and every single person who gives Derek his power. His voice was quiet and as hard as stone. It was the voice of a man who had built an empire from the ground up, who had fought his way from a small apartment in a rough neighborhood to the very top. He was a man who understood the mechanics of power, and he knew exactly how to use them. "I'm going to take his whole world apart," James declared. "I will break it down until nothing at all is left." Within 2 hours, James Caldwell's guest house had become a war room. Piles of documents and folders covered every flat surface. 3 mobile phones were lined up on the kitchen island, all of them plugged into chargers. Mugs of coffee that no one remembered brewing had long since gone cold. Diane Sullivan was the first to arrive. She had served as James's chief investment officer for 15 years. She was the kind of woman who could perform complex financial modeling in her head and read a company's financial statement as if it were a novel. She walked in holding a leather briefcase, looking as if she had already completed a full day of work. "I have pulled together all of Derek Ashford's financial information," Diane announced. She placed her briefcase on the table and turned on a tablet. "Everything that is publicly known and a few things that are not." "How did you get the confidential files?" James questioned. A faint smile touched Diane's lips, a smile that looked sharp enough to cut. "I have my sources," she said. "Derek's net worth is roughly $2.3 billion. Most of that is tied up in his technology firm, Ashford Innovations. He also holds significant real estate, stocks, and has funds hidden in overseas accounts." She swiped through multiple screens filled with numbers and graphs. "But this is the interesting part. His company became publicly traded 3 years ago. This makes him answerable to his shareholders and a board of directors. If his company's stock value collapses, they will have no choice but to oust him from his own company." "What would make the stock drop so dramatically?" Tori asked from the sofa. She had insisted on sitting up, wanting to be involved in every decision. "A huge scandal, a complete loss of investor trust, or criminal allegations. Any one of those would get the job done," Diane replied, her gaze fixed on James. "And I have something more. I have sources inside Ashford Innovations. There is a man there named Gregory Whitman. He has served as Derek's business manager for a decade. My contacts say he has been looking for a way out for months. He knows everything, James. He knows where all the secrets are hidden and where the money is moved. But he is terrified. Derek keeps him under constant watch. Set up a meeting," James commanded. "Make it completely secure. Pick a location where he will feel safe. He will be difficult to convince. Derek has his family monitored. His oldest daughter was tailed on her way to school just last week. In that case, we will provide him with a fortress," James stated. "Total protection for him and his loved ones. A security team 24 hours a day, whatever it takes." The next to arrive was Marcus Webb. The journalist had the appearance of someone who had not slept. He had dark circles under his eyes and a laptop bag hanging from his shoulder. He sat down at the table and got straight to business. "I have been digging into a story about Derek for the last 6 months," Marcus began. "I have found evidence of corporate crime, money laundering, and some truly awful business practices. I had many pieces of the puzzle, but not enough to publish the story. That changed today." He opened his laptop. "I was able to locate 6 other women Derek was involved with before he met Tori. 4 of them refused to talk to me. One of them left the country to get away from him, but I found one woman, Jennifer Torres. He forced her to sign a confidentiality agreement 5 years ago. He broke her arm and then paid her $500,000 to go away. She is now living under a different name in a small town 2 states away." "Can you reach out to her?" Tori asked. "I already know where she is," Marcus replied. "The difficult part will be getting her to speak. She is incredibly frightened. She has built an entirely new life for herself. She does not want to be pulled back into the nightmare of being one of Derek Ashford's victims. Tell her that if she does not speak up, there will be more women after me," Tori said, her voice quiet but strong. "Tell her to see the video. Tell her to look at my pregnant belly and try to remember how it felt when his hands were on her. Then ask if she can live with herself if she stays silent." Marcus looked directly at her. "I will," he vowed. The last person on their team arrived later that afternoon. Her name was Catherine Mills, a divorce lawyer. She was 55 years old and was known throughout the legal world as the executioner. She had a formidable reputation for completely demolishing abusive men in the courtroom. And she had the results to back it up. She had won 12 straight custody fights in cases that involved domestic abuse with not a single loss. Catherine sat, went over all the evidence they had gathered, and then explained the one absolute deadline that would shape their every action. "I need everyone's complete attention," she began. "Tori is due to give birth in 4 weeks. We have to file for emergency custody of the child before the baby is born. The moment that baby takes its first breath, Derek gets a legal claim to visitation. If he files his paperwork before we file ours, a judge might give him temporary custody while the case is sorted out. We cannot let that happen for any reason." She directed her gaze to Tori. "I have already started making inquiries. Our case is assigned to Judge Patricia Brennan. She is known for having no tolerance whatsoever for domestic violence, but Judge Brennan is also famous for being extremely fair. She will not rule in our favor just based on our claims. We are going to need solid proof. 4 weeks, Tori. That is the only time we have." For the first time since that horrible night, Tori felt a small flicker of something that she almost thought might be hope. A small seed of hope was just starting to grow in Tori's mind. She was surrounded by a team of experts, had a solid plan, and had people prepared to fight for her, but Tori knew from painful experience that hope could be a dangerous thing. Hope makes you let your guard down. Hope tricks you into thinking that everything might actually be okay. Derek made his move only 48 hours later. His response was cold, strategic, and incredibly cruel. First, Tori's private medical information began to appear on celebrity news websites. They were not her actual medical files, but expertly faked documents that described her as mentally unbalanced, suicidal, and paranoid. A psychologist who had never met Tori, never talked to her, and was not even in the same state as her appeared on a major morning television show. He shared his serious concerns that she was at a high risk of a complete mental breakdown after giving birth. Next, Derek locked down every financial account they had together. Their checking, their savings, their credit cards, and all joint investments were instantly frozen. With a hand that trembled, Tori checked her banking application and saw the balance in her personal account. $300. It was every single penny she had to her name. The social media tag Gold Digger went viral. Thousands of people who knew absolutely nothing about her or her situation appeared online. They were calling her a fraud, a liar, a gold digger who trapped a good man with a baby and was now trying to ruin his life. Then, a picture popped up on her phone. It was taken with a telephoto lens from across the street, showing her leaving Dr. Hoffman's clinic. The message below it was short and cold. "We are watching you. Come home." But the worst blow was yet to come. Derek's lawyers delivered a formal notice to Dr. Hoffman's office. They threatened a massive lawsuit, accusing her of breaking patient confidentiality rules. They demanded a full retraction of her medical report on Tori's injuries. The letter was expertly written, heavily suggesting that Tori might have caused the injuries to herself. Diane called James that night. Her voice was hollow, all the fight gone out of it. "Gregory Whitman is off the case. Derek's team got to him. Someone followed his daughter home from school for a second time. His wife is threatening to leave him if he testifies. He is terrified. He can no longer help us." James hung up the phone. He stood in his study without moving for a long time, his eyes fixed on nothing. At last he picked up the phone again and called Catherine. "They are going after everyone," he said. "Anyone who stands up for her becomes a target." "That is page 1 in the abuser's playbook," Catherine said. "You isolate the victim, you use fear and threats, you make them feel like fighting back is so much worse than just giving up." Tori was on her bed in the guest house room, staring blankly at the ceiling. The tiny bit of hope she had felt earlier was completely gone, washed away by a tidal wave of fear. At 2 in the morning, she finally picked up her phone. "Dad, can I come over to the main house? I just really do not want to be by myself tonight." "Of course. Come over right now." She walked the short path between the two buildings. The night air was cool on her skin, under a dark sky full of stars. In the distance, she could hear the normal city sounds of a dog barking and a car alarm. A soft wind rustled the leaves in the trees. But even with all the normal sounds, Tori felt like she was being watched, like a pair of eyes was following her every move. Her walk became a brisk, hurried pace. Time was running out. There were only 26 days left. The days began to blur into one long, exhausting nightmare. Tori stopped leaving her father's estate completely. There was no reason to go out, and every reason to stay hidden. News vans were now parked outside the main gate day and night. Sometimes as many as 30 reporters would shout questions at her whenever the gate opened for even a moment. Photographers with huge camera lenses hid in the bushes. They were hoping to catch a picture of her through a window. Protesters marched on the sidewalk outside. They held signs that said Derek was innocent and called her a money-hungry liar. Someone even left a dead rat on the front porch. It was a real animal, its body cold and stiff with milky eyes. A small note was tied to its tail with two simple words: Gold Digger. James found the horrible thing before Tori could see it and got rid of it right away. He never told her about it, but she saw his hands shaking afterward. The only safe place for Tori was the nursery. Her father had set it up for her in the guest house. She painted the walls a soft, sunny yellow. She organized all the tiny baby clothes by size, then by color, and then by season. She folded and refolded the little blankets until every corner was perfectly straight. She even put the baby's crib together all by herself. At 8.5 months pregnant, it was difficult to reach all the screws, but building something with her own hands was the only thing that made her feel useful. One afternoon, Becca found her sitting on the nursery floor. She was surrounded by little piles of baby socks. She was staring at two pairs of white socks that looked almost the same. One pair had a very thin pink stripe along the top. The other had tiny pink polka dots. They were so similar but not exactly the same. Tori had been trying to sort them for 2 hours. "Tori, what on earth are you doing?" Becca stood in the doorway holding several bags of takeout food. Her face was full of worry. "I am organizing," Tori said. She held up the two pairs of socks for her friend to see. "This one has the pink line, and this one has the pink dots. They cannot get mixed up." "Okay," Becca said, speaking in a very slow and careful voice. "But you have been sitting right here with just those two pairs of socks for the last 2 hours. I just need everything to be perfect." Becca set the food down on a small table. She came and sat on the floor next to her friend. She crossed her legs in the middle of all the tiny clothes. She gently took the socks from Tori's hands and placed them on the floor. "Talk to me," she said in a soft voice. "I mean, really talk to me." Tori's hands automatically reached for another drawer to start organizing again. Becca put a hand on her arm, gently stopping her. "Tori, I'm fine. I just need to have everything ready before the baby arrives. I need to feel like I have control over something." Her voice began to tremble. "Because I do not have control over anything else in my life." And with those words, everything came flooding out. "The news is saying I am insane. Derek's lawyers are threatening to take my baby away from me. His mother is on television every single day calling me a liar. Someone left a dead rat on my dad's porch yesterday with a note, and She buried her face in her hands. "I cannot stop sorting these ridiculous socks." The tears started to fall. These were not the quiet, controlled tears she had cried in the hospital. This was a messy, ugly cry that came from a place so deep inside it felt like it was ripping her apart. Becca wrapped her arms around her friend, pulling her into a tight hug. "You are not okay," she said. "And you know what? That is perfectly fine. You do not have to be okay right now. I am supposed to be strong for the baby and for my dad and for everyone who is helping me." "Being strong does not mean you never fall apart," Becca said, holding her even tighter. "It means you fall apart and then you find a way to put yourself back together. So go ahead and break for a little while. I will be right here." Tori cried on her best friend's shoulder. She let go of all the fear, the anger, and the heartbreak she had been holding inside for weeks. She cried for the marriage she once thought was real. She cried for the man she had wrongly believed Derek was. And she cried for the woman she used to be before she became Mrs. Ashford. She cried for a future that she had imagined so clearly in her mind, a future that was now completely gone. When the crying finally stopped, she felt empty and exhausted, but also strangely lighter. Later that night at 3 in the morning, Tori was wide awake. The baby was moving inside her, doing what felt like a complete gymnastics routine. She quietly got out of bed and walked into the nursery. The room was dark. The only light was the pale moonlight shining through the window. As she sat down in the rocking chair, her eyes moved over everything she had so carefully arranged. She looked at the crib with its soft yellow blankets. She looked at the changing table, stacked high with diapers, and the bookshelf full of children's books. She remembered choosing each one. She imagined herself reading them to her daughter in the quiet of the evening. She had built this entire little world believing that Derek would be a part of it with her. She had truly thought they would be a family. She believed he would hold their daughter and finally become the man she had always wanted him to be. "I'm so sorry," Tori whispered to her belly. "I am so sorry that I chose him to be your father." The baby answered with a soft kick. Tori picked up a tiny white baby shirt with little yellow ducks on it. She folded it, unfolded it, and then folded it again just to have something to do with her hands. "Did you know that I used to run marathons before I met your father? I ran 3 of them in 2 years. I was even training for my 4th one when I met Derek at a charity dinner. He was so charming. The entire room was completely fascinated by him. And for some reason, that was the night he decided to tell me what he thought about it." She kept folding and refolding the tiny shirt. "He told me that running marathons was a total waste of my time. He said I should be focusing on more important things for our future. So I just stopped. I gave away my running shoes. I canceled my spots in the races I had signed up for. I told myself it was not a huge sacrifice. I told myself it was just a small thing you do for a person that you love." She put down the little shirt and picked up a tiny pair of socks. "I used to have so many friends. We would go to lunch. We were in a book club. We would go out every other Friday. But Derek started saying my friends were a bad influence. He said they did not understand our life and were just jealous of us. So one by one, I stopped seeing them until Becca was the only friend I had left. And I almost lost her too. I used to have my own opinions about politics, about my charity work, even about which new restaurant we should go to. But Derek told me my opinions made me sound unintelligent. He said I embarrassed him every time I said what I really thought. So I just stopped having opinions. I just started to agree with everything he said, about absolutely everything." She then felt the silent tears streaming down her face in the pale moonlight. "My sweet baby girl, I was not always this broken. I was once a whole person. My name was Victoria Caldwell. I ran charities. Helping other people was my entire life. I was smart and I was confident. But that all disappeared when I became Mrs. Derek Ashford. That is when I lost sight of who Victoria really was." A powerful memory suddenly filled her mind. It was the last conversation she ever had with her mother. They were in a hospital room, a room so much like the one Tori had just been in. Her mother's hand felt so fragile in hers, like delicate paper stretched over bones. The cancer had taken almost everything from her, but it could not put out the fire in her eyes. They still shined with so much life. "My sweet girl, I need you to make me a promise." "Anything, Mom." "Of course. You must never, ever let anyone make you feel small. This world will try to do that. Men will definitely try. Even other women will try. They will want you to shrink yourself down so they can feel bigger. You cannot let them do it. You have to take up all the space you deserve in this world. You have to use your voice. Be big and be loud and be exactly who you are without ever feeling sorry for it. I promise, Mom." But she knew, in the deepest part of her heart, that she had broken that promise. She had let Derek make her feel small. She had made herself smaller and smaller until she had almost disappeared completely. Tori pushed herself up out of the rocking chair. She walked to the window and looked out at the rain. Her own tired reflection stared back at her. The ugly bruises on her neck were finally starting to heal, but her pregnant belly felt heavier each day. She had survived so much and she was still standing on her own. She was still here. "I failed you, Mom," she whispered, thinking of the promise she had made. "But I am going to make this right. I will get my strength back for both of us." The big clock on the wall reminded her that she only had 22 days. deep in her thoughts, a new strategy started to take shape. It was an idea no one had given her, a plan that no one would ever expect. It was something she knew she had to do alone. Tori could not fall asleep. It was 4 in the morning, and the baby was tossing and turning inside her as she scrolled on her phone. She kept remembering something Diane mentioned during their first meeting. Gregory Whitman had accidentally revealed that Derek was seeing another woman, a model. He was using company money to pay for her apartment, expensive gifts, and a luxury city lifestyle. Tori went to Instagram. She easily found Derek's public account. It was perfect and professionally managed, full of photos of him at charity events, speaking at conferences, and posing in his large office. Nothing looked wrong. She then looked at photos where he was tagged and went through his follower list. Still, she found nothing strange. But then she remembered something very important. Derek always had a second phone. He had another phone, and he always kept it locked in the safe inside his home office. Tori remembered seeing him using it late at night when he thought she was sound asleep. She never asked him about it because she had learned a long time ago not to ask Derek questions he did not want to answer. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a call from a number she did not recognize. Tori's heart began to race as she answered. The voice was an older woman's, and she spoke in a shaky whisper like she was afraid someone might hear her. "You have to look for his other account. The username starts with D-A and then a few numbers." Before Tori could say a word, the woman hung up. Tori just stared at her phone, completely shocked. She had no idea who the caller was, but her voice sounded familiar in a strange way, like a memory from long ago. It was not a friend, but maybe it was someone she heard on the television or walked past in a crowded building once. She started to search. DA 2019, DA private, DA 8834. She looked through so many accounts, but none of them seemed right. And then she saw it. The profile was private, with only 3 followers. One of those followers was a model named Amber Collins. Tori tapped on Amber's public page. She was 26 years old and absolutely beautiful, with the sharp cheekbones and confident look of a professional. The woman had a beautiful apartment right in the center of the city. Her entire social media was filled with pictures of expensive gifts, designer bags, and ski trips to Aspen. She posted photos from restaurants where one dinner cost more money than Tori had to her name, and Derek was paying for it all with money from the company. Tori decided to keep this plan to herself. She did not tell her father, she did not tell Catherine, and she did not even tell her friend Becca. Instead, she sent a private message to Amber. It said, "My name is Victoria Ashford, Derek's wife. I'm not mad at you, but we must speak right away. This is for your own safety." 2 very long days went by. Tori checked her phone constantly, worried that Amber would either ignore her or, even worse, show the message to Derek. Then, she got a notification. It was a single word. Where? They agreed to meet at a small cafe about 15 miles away from the city. Tori arrived wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap. She felt a little silly, like an actor in a cheap spy movie. But she also felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She was in control. For the first time, she was making her own moves, not just waiting for someone to rescue her. She was not using her father's influence, Catherine's legal skills, or Marcus's ability to find information. This was her battle to fight. When Tori walked into the cafe, Amber was already waiting. In person, the woman seemed smaller and much more delicate than she did in her online photos. Her makeup was done perfectly, but her eyes looked cautious and ready for a fight. They were the eyes of someone who was always preparing for an argument. "You're just some crazy, jealous wife here to ruin his life," Amber said, before Tori could even take a seat. Tori did not answer. She simply sat down, took out her phone, and played the video from the charity gala. She placed the phone on the table between them and let the horrible scene play out. Amber watched as Derek's hands got tighter and tighter around Tori's pregnant neck. She watched Tori struggle for air until her body fell limp. She saw waiters run over to pull Derek off of her, and she saw Tori fall onto the cold, hard floor. The video was over, but Amber sat completely still. "He did this to me," Tori said, her voice steady and calm. "And one day, he will do it to you. It is just a matter of time." Tori leaned forward just a little. Has he started checking your phone? Has he started saying your friends are a bad influence? Has he started to complain about your clothes? Has he ever said to you, "Look what you made me do"? A look of recognition, then pure fear, appeared on Amber's face. The seed of doubt was now planted. She stood up without another word and walked right out of the cafe. Tori sat alone at the table for a long time after she left. She calmly drank her tea and felt the baby give a soft kick. She wondered for a moment if she had just made a huge, life-changing mistake. But she knew she had not. In 2 weeks, Derek would secretly put spying software on Amber's phone. He would start to demand to know where she was and who she was talking to. He would call her friends awful names and say her modeling career was a complete joke. He would tell her that she was nothing at all without him. And that is when Amber would finally decide to call Tori. She would bring financial documents that showed every single dollar Derek had spent on her using company funds. She would have the lease for the apartment, the credit card bills for all the gifts, and the records of the money transfers for their trips. She would provide all the evidence that Gregory was too scared to give them. But that was still 2 weeks in the future. Right now, the clock was still ticking, and with only 20 days left, Tori had other problems to solve. While Tori was meeting with Amber, James and Diane were focusing on Gregory. Diane set up another meeting at a diner 60 miles from the city, a place where nobody would know them. Gregory showed up looking like he had not slept for a week. "They threatened my daughters, James," he said, his voice weak. "Someone followed my oldest child home from school. A black car sat in their driveway for 2 whole hours. Gregory's wife was completely terrified. She wanted to sell their home and move to another state. James made a very clear promise. I will make sure your family is protected. He offered to hire a team of professional security guards who would be on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for as long as they needed. I will pay for everything, he promised." Gregory just shook his head. "You don't get it," he replied. "Derek is not the kind of person who makes threats he won't follow through on." Diane slid a large brown envelope across the table to Gregory. "Neither am I," she said. "Gregory, I need you to listen to me very, very closely. The Securities and Exchange Commission has already started an official investigation. They have been looking into Ashford Innovations' money for months because the numbers didn't add up. They are going to find the secret bank accounts, whether you help or not. And when they do, you are going to look like you are his partner. You are the person who manages those accounts. You are the one who approved the money transfers. Your name is signed on every single paper." All the blood drained from Gregory's face. Diane continued, "You have a choice to make right this second. You can work with us, and we can try to get you immunity. You can save yourself before the entire company crashes. Or you can just wait for what is coming and end up in a prison cell right next to Derek." Gregory could only look down at the envelope. His hands were shaking so much that they made the coffee in his cup move. 3 days later, he met James in an empty parking garage. He could not stop looking over his shoulder for the entire time they met. He slipped a tiny Universal Serial bus drive into James's hand. "This is the proof of the $200 million he stole," Gregory whispered. "The offshore accounts, the wire transfer records, and the emails from Derek about hiding the money from everyone. It is all on here. Everything." He stopped for a moment, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "I have 2 little girls," he said, his voice dropping low. "I can hardly look them in the eye anymore, knowing I have been helping a monster." His hands trembled as he spun around and rushed away. The clock was now ticking down with 18 days left. Tori's lawyer, Catherine Mills, filed an official request for Tori's complete medical records from Dr. Hoffman. It was a standard legal demand, a court order that forced the doctor to release the files. At that very same time, Derek's lawyers sent their own warning to Dr. Hoffman. They promised to absolutely ruin her career if she ever complied with the court's order. Dr. Hoffman consulted with her own attorney. The advice she got was perfectly clear. The court order was the law, but the letter from Derek's team was just an intimidation tactic. Professionally, she was required to obey the court, but she understood that following the rules would have a devastating price. Derek's lawyers would bury her in formal complaints with the state medical board. They would force her into hearing after hearing. She would have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just to protect her own name. They would use every trick in the book to try and take away her medical license. That night, Dr. Hoffman was working in her office, all by herself. She looked down at the file sitting on her desk. Inside was a 3-year record of documented injuries. It had pictures she had taken with Tori's permission. It was full of her own notes from exams, detailing bruises that never made sense with the stories Tori told. She remembered all the times Tori would flinch from a simple touch on her arm. She recalled how Tori's heart would pound during appointments, not because she was afraid of doctors, but because she lived under the crushing stress of a violent home. She reached for a pen. She signed the release form. Her hand shook just a little, but her signature was strong and clear. The very next morning, Tori's entire medical history was sent to the court. It was the complete, unedited record. It contained every single photograph, every single note, and every injury she had noted over 3 years. It also held the medical proof of the marks on Tori's neck, from when he almost killed her while she was giving birth. The countdown now showed just 15 days to go. Marcus Webb, the journalist, had been looking for Jennifer Torres for a solid week. He finally located her in a small town a few states away. She had created a new life with a new name, working as a teacher for second graders. She had carefully put her world back together in a small house with a garden and a golden retriever, far from the chaos Derek Ashford had caused. The first time Marcus knocked, she only opened the door a tiny bit, keeping the chain lock firmly in place. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement," she told him. "I am forbidden from talking about it. They paid me $500,000. "That was the price for your silence," Marcus said softly. "But he is still out there, and he is doing this to other people. He was recorded strangling his pregnant wife." "I am aware. I saw the video," Jennifer said, her voice empty and tired. It was the voice of a person who had tried for 5 years to forget. "Then you have to help me make it stop." "I would need to return all of the money," she said. "He would sue me for every single thing I have. His people would find me." "You have no idea what kind of man he is." Marcus drove the 2 hours back to the city that day. He could not get the image of Jennifer's face out of his mind, framed in the small crack of her doorway. He saw the absolute terror in her eyes and the way she held herself, with her shoulders hunched forward as if she were trying to disappear. He went back to her house a week later. This time, he had photos from the gala. They were large, 8x10 prints that showed Tori's pregnant belly in clear detail. Jennifer stared at the photograph. She focused on Derek's hands wrapped around the throat of another woman whose face was a mask of pure terror. Jennifer's own hands started to tremble as she opened her front door a little wider. "She is pregnant," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely there. "She looks like she is about 8 months along." After a long, heavy silence, she confessed, "He did the very same thing to me, the choking. I honestly thought he was going to end my life that night." She slowly sank onto her porch steps. "When I fought back, he broke my wrist. He snapped it like it was a dry twig. Then he drove me to the emergency room and told everyone I fell off a horse. Can you even imagine that?" "Who falls off a horse in the middle of Manhattan?" Her golden retriever came over and laid its head in her lap, offering quiet comfort. "I am breaking the non-disclosure agreement," she said, her voice now strong with decision. "I do not care about the money. I want you to use my real name. I am done being afraid of him." The calendar on the wall showed only 12 days were left. This entire timeline was based on the lies Derek had paid doctors to tell. At that exact moment, Derek was holding a press conference. He was announcing a massive donation to a charity for children with cancer. News cameras showed him at a podium with tears in his eyes. He looked humble, generous, and completely misunderstood. "With my recent personal struggles," he began, "I want to put my energy where it really counts, helping children in need. My wife and I have had our problems, but I hope to solve this with dignity and respect." He called her my wife, as if they were a happy couple, as if he had not just tried to kill her. Public opinion changed in an instant. Social media filled up with comments like, "Maybe she is the one with the problem," and "He seems so genuine." Catherine, her lawyer, called for an emergency meeting. He is not just trying to win custody, she explained. He is trying to change the entire story, and people are starting to believe him. We have to file our petition tonight. And Marcus, that article has to be published now, before he completely controls what people think. But all Tori could feel was the heavy weight of sadness that kept her up at night. To have any chance of winning, she needed to testify. She would have to sit on a witness stand in a courtroom and describe every single detail of 3 years of abuse, while Derek sat just 10 feet away. The man who had choked her would be watching as she told the world his darkest secrets. The thought alone was enough to make Tori run to the bathroom and get sick. Her friend Becca came in with her, holding her hair back. "I just cannot do this," Tori sobbed, her cheek pressed against the cool tile floor. "Yes, you can," Becca answered gently. "You have already survived things that were so much worse than a courtroom." Later that evening, long after everyone else in the house was asleep, Tori did something nobody expected. She picked up her phone. With hands that she could not keep from shaking, she opened the recording app she had installed on her phone. She almost dropped the device as she carefully typed Derek's number. Taking a deep breath, she put the phone to her ear and waited. Derek picked up on the second ring. The moment he knew who was calling, his voice completely changed. He put on his smooth, charming business voice, the one that had fooled so many people for so many years. "Victoria," he said, his tone as warm as honey, "I am so glad you called. I have been so worried. I have been thinking all day about what you said, about maybe coming home. That is all I have ever wanted. I just want our family to be together again. You, me, and our sweet baby girl." He then added, "The way things were always supposed to be." Tori made her own voice sound perfectly calm and steady. She had gone over this conversation in her mind 100 times. She knew exactly what to say. She knew how to make him react. She knew Derek's biggest weakness was his need to brag about his own power. "Before I make a decision, I need to know something," she said. "If I come back, what will happen to the people who helped me? What are you going to do to my father? And what about my lawyer?" In that one instant, Derek's friendly act completely disappeared. The change lasted for only a second, but a second was all it took. "Your father will wish he never met me. I will destroy him," he snarled. "And Catherine Mills will never work as a lawyer again. I have a team looking at her finances right now. I can promise you they will find something. As for that reporter, Marcus Webb, my people are already digging into his past. Every single person who got in my way will be sorry." "And what about Gregory?" she asked, her voice remaining firm. "He already left his job." "Gregory is a dead man," Derek spit out. "He really thinks he can hide from me. I know exactly where his daughters go to school. It is Lincoln Elementary. One is in the 3rd grade and the other is in the 5th. I know their names. I even know the exact time their school bus drops them off every afternoon." Tori's hands were trembling so much she thought she might drop the phone. But somehow, her voice stayed perfectly calm and controlled. It was the best performance of her entire life. "Okay, I understand," she said. "I just needed to ask." "So, does this mean you are coming home?" he asked, clearly happy with his show of power. "I will think about it," she replied. Then she hung up the phone. She immediately saved the recording. For 5 whole minutes, she just sat there in the darkness, concentrating only on her breathing. Then she sent the audio file to Catherine. Her text message was short and clear. "He threatened Gregory's children, he said their names, he threatened my dad, and he threatened you. And he made threats against Marcus. The whole conversation is on this recording." Catherine called her back in less than a minute. "Where on earth did you get this?" she asked, her voice full of shock. "I called him and I recorded every word he said." A long silence passed over the phone line. "Tori," Catherine finally said, speaking very slowly and carefully, "what you have here is proof that he is intimidating witnesses. He threatened children. That is a very serious crime, and you have it all on tape in his own voice." Catherine went on. "This recording will be played in a courtroom, and there is no way he can possibly explain it away." "Good," Tori said. She'd done this by herself. No one had told her to do it. No one had even thought of the idea. She had used the one weapon Derek would have never expected. She had been willing to listen to his awful threats one last time. She had walked straight back into the fire and came out with the very thing that would burn his whole world to the ground. The countdown clock now showed only 10 days remaining. At 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, Marcus Webb's article was published on the website of one of the country's most trusted newspapers. The headline was impossible to look away from. The Real Derek Ashford, A History of Violence, Abuse, and Financial Crimes. The story was the result of a 6-month investigation written out in 12,000 powerful words. 4 of his former girlfriends had found the courage to use their real names. Every one of them told stories that followed the same scary pattern. It always started with his amazing charm, which drew people into his life. Then came the isolation when he would slowly cut them off from their friends and family. After that, he would take total control, managing every small detail of their lives. Finally, the physical violence would start, getting worse and worse over time until their lives were nothing like they used to be. Jennifer Torres was a major part of the article. She told the story of the night Derek broke her wrist, remembering every single terrible detail. She described the awful sound her bone made when it snapped. She remembered how he just looked down at her while she screamed in pain. Afterward, he drove her to the hospital, holding her hand softly the entire time. He told the doctors and nurses that she had just fallen off a horse. The very next day, he gave her a check for $500,000. He was still in his pajamas and acted like he was just paying for a parking ticket. His lawyers had her sign a non-disclosure agreement before her pain medicine even had a chance to work. "I signed it because I was completely terrified of him," Jennifer said in the article. "I signed it because he promised he would ruin my life if I did not. I then had to spend 5 years pretending it never happened. But it did happen. And I know it happened to other women after me. That is the truth I cannot live with anymore." 3 former employees also shared their stories about the violence they had seen at the company. One person remembered Derek launching a laptop at an intern's head because a presentation was not good enough. A female assistant endured so much verbal abuse that she finally quit without any notice. Later, she had to file for disability after a doctor diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress. Employees described his violent outbursts behind closed doors, which usually left broken furniture and terrified workers hiding from his rage. The financial crimes that Gregory had discovered were laid out in clear, undeniable detail. The article revealed offshore bank accounts in places like the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. It showed wire transfers that added up to more than $200 million. The evidence also included emails where Derek openly talked about hiding money from his investors and cheating the government. The company's official financial records were all fake, created to hide the enormous theft. The article also included still pictures from the security cameras at the Gala. The images plainly showed Derek's hands wrapped tightly around Tori's throat. Her pregnant stomach was obvious in the photographs. The look of pure terror on her face was frozen in time, just before the waiters were able to pull him off of her. Gregory was also quoted in the article. "I worked for Derek Ashford for 10 years, he stated. I saw him slowly become a monster. I saw him hurt people and then buy their silence. I saw him steal millions from his own business, and I said nothing because I was scared. But I am not scared anymore. It is time for the world to learn the truth." In only 1 hour, the article had been shared 10,000 times. 2 hours later, Ashford Innovations released a statement that denied everything and threatened a lawsuit. 3 hours after that, 2 more women shared their own stories of his abuse. By the end of the evening, the stock price for Ashford Innovations had dropped by 15%. Derek left a frantic and angry message on Tori's voicemail. She never answered the phone. She simply allowed the machine to record his words. "That article is a complete lie," he shouted. "I will sue that reporter until he has absolutely nothing left. I am going to take our daughter from you, and I will make sure you never see her again." Tori saved the voicemail. It was just one more piece of evidence. Every furious word he said only made his own problems worse, but he was too arrogant to see it. The custody hearing began just 8 days before Tori was due to give birth. On the first day in Judge Brennan's courtroom, Catherine started to present her evidence. She began with the medical records from Dr. Hoffman, which detailed 3 years of carefully documented injuries. There were official hospital pictures of bruises on Tori's arms, her ribs, and her wrists. The doctor's notes talked about a patient who would physically pull back from any sudden movement. The file also had the official report on the bruises on her neck from the night he attacked her at the Gala. Next, she showed the sworn statements from 17 people who were at the event. Every single person described the attack with precise and horrifying details. Several of them pointed out that Derek had been drinking a lot of alcohol throughout the entire night. 2 of them even said they heard him say threatening things about Tori earlier that evening. Then Catherine played the security video on the large screen inside the courtroom. The video had no sound, only the quiet and chilling images. The whole room watched as Derek trapped Tori in a corner. They saw his hands go to her throat. They saw her body go limp, the waiters rushing to pull him away and Tori collapsing onto the hard floor. After that, Gregory Whitman gave his testimony about the company's finances. He presented the court with bank records, receipts for wire transfers, and email conversations. All of it proved that $200 million of the company's money had just vanished. Finally, Jennifer Torres was asked to take the witness stand. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was strong and clear. She told the court about her shattered wrist, the non-disclosure paper she was made to sign, the payment for her silence, and the 5 long years she had to live with her secret in quiet shame. The trial went on with 3 more of Derek's former workers. Each one of them described his violent temper and the frightening outbursts they had seen at the office. Then Catherine played the recording from Tori's phone call. Suddenly, Derek's own voice filled the courtroom. Everyone heard him threaten Tori's father, her lawyer, and Marcus Webb. They heard him threaten Gregory's young children, saying each of their names one by one. A deep and total silence fell over the entire room. Even Derek's own lawyers set down their pens. On the second day, it was the defense team's chance to present its case. His lawyers called 3 different psychiatrists to the stand, but none of them had ever even met Tori. Judge Brennan dismissed each one after just a few minutes of questioning. She said very clearly, "Unless you have personally examined Mrs. Ashford, I have no desire to hear your opinions about her mental health." After that, Margaret Ashford, Derek's mother, took the stand. She wore a simple black dress and pearls, trying to look like a perfect and loving mother. She started to describe Tori as a difficult, bossy, and manipulative woman. It was at that moment that Catherine played the video from Margaret's own phone, which she filmed on the night of the gala. It showed the exact scene Margaret had recorded as her son choked his pregnant wife. The phone shook slightly as it captured the awful event in the hallway. Derek's strong hands, Tori's helpless body, and Margaret just standing there filming everything. "You recorded your own son trying to kill his wife," Catherine said, her voice perfectly calm. "And you did absolutely nothing. You did not call for help. You did not even try to stop him." Catherine paused, letting her words settle in the quiet room. "You did not even put your phone down. You just kept on recording." Margaret whispered, "I was in total shock." Catherine replied instantly, "Or perhaps you were just gathering evidence to use against Victoria later." At that question, Margaret's calm and confident image completely fell apart. She had no answer. Then, she gave her final decision. "The evidence that Mrs. Ashford's legal team has shown this court is overwhelming, and to be honest, it is deeply troubling," she began. "We have heard testimony from many witnesses who described a long and awful history of violent, controlling, and abusive behavior from Derek Ashford that has gone on for more than 10 years. We have looked at medical records that document years of physical abuse. And we have all seen a video that shows a clear and undeniable attempt to strangle Mrs. Ashford while she was 8 months pregnant." Judge Brennan then looked straight at Derek. "Mr. Ashford, your entire defense is an insult to the intelligence of this court. You tried to murder your wife in a room where hundreds of people were watching. After that, you used your money and power to start a public smear campaign to ruin the reputation of the very woman you attacked. You faked medical records, you paid witnesses to lie for you, and you stood in my courtroom today and continued to tell lies. The judge then turned to look at Tori. "Mrs. Ashford, I am granting every single one of your requests," she said with complete clarity. "You will be given full legal and physical custody of your daughter when she is born. Mr. Ashford will only be allowed supervised visits for 1 hour each month to happen at a secure building with a court official present at all times. We will look at this arrangement again in 1 year. In addition, I'm issuing an emergency protective order. Derek Ashford is not allowed to come within 500 feet of Victoria Ashford for any reason. He is not allowed to contact her in any way or to have another person contact her for him. Any violation of this order will lead to his immediate arrest. This case is now being referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. What you did was not just an assault, it was attempted murder. You belong in a prison, not in my courtroom making demands." The judge's gavel came down with a sharp, final sound. Tori fell into Catherine's arms, overcome with a feeling of relief that made her entire body tremble. Her father, James, wrapped them both in a hug so tight it was almost hard to breathe. Her friend Becca was crying without trying to hide it. Even Catherine, a lawyer who had won over 100 cases, had tears in her eyes. Tori had actually won. The long nightmare was finally over. Her daughter, Charlotte, was going to be safe. She glanced at a calendar and realized her due date was only 3 days away. Their victory had come just in time. 2 days after the court ruling, at 3:17 in the morning, a deep contraction woke Tori up and stole her breath. She lay in bed for 10 minutes, timing them on her phone. They were 5 minutes apart, then 4, then 3. This was not a false alarm. This was really happening. She called her father, and he answered on the very first ring. He had barely slept since the gala. "Dad," she managed to breathe out, "I think the baby is coming." He answered immediately, "I'm on my way. Do not go anywhere." Her father, James, was at her door in just 10 minutes. He carried the hospital bag they had so carefully packed weeks ago. Every single item was in its proper place. They thought they had prepared for everything. But nothing could prepare them for what was about to unfold. At the hospital, Dr. Hoffman was already there waiting. She had made a special point to be on call for Tori's delivery. The doctor checked Tori's progress and gave her a reassuring smile. "You are already at 7 centimeters, she announced. "This little girl is certainly eager to join us." Tori was taken to a private delivery room immediately. James never left her side, holding her hand through each wave of pain. Her friend Becca hurried in about 20 minutes later, looking like she had run the whole way. "I am so sorry. I got here as fast as I could. How is everything going?" James glanced up. "She is doing wonderfully. The epidural is working well." The labor was progressing quickly, perhaps too quickly. When Tori reached 9 centimeters, the expression on Dr. Hoffman's face suddenly changed. She signaled for more nurses to enter the room. She spoke in a low voice to the anesthesiologist, but Tori heard every word. The words she heard sent a chill of pure fear through her entire body. "The bruising on her cervix from the attack is creating a problem. She is starting to hemorrhage." In an instant, the calm room became a blur of frantic activity. It was suddenly full of medical staff. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor turned into a rapid, piercing alarm. Dr. Hoffman had less than 30 seconds to make a choice that would mean life or death. "We need to perform an emergency C-section right now." The world began to spin around Tori. She felt a set of hands moving her onto a different bed. The sharp cold of an operating room met her skin. She could see the anesthesiologist making adjustments to her medication. Tori reached out a hand, fumbling in the air until she found her father's. "Is the baby going to be okay, Dad? Please tell me my baby is safe," she asked, her voice shaking. He gripped her hand firmly. "The baby is doing just fine, and you are going to be just fine too. I will be right here the entire time." Charlotte was born at 4:22 that morning. She was a small, pink infant, and her first cries were loud and healthy. She had no clue she had just arrived in the middle of a life-threatening crisis. But Tori was not doing just fine. The bleeding was out of control. She had already lost a dangerous amount of blood. Dr. Hoffman and her team were working with lightning speed. They ordered blood transfusions. More equipment was wheeled in, more monitors were connected, and more people in surgical scrubs worked with a silent, determined focus. Tori's vision started to go dark at the edges. The very last thing she saw before losing consciousness was her father holding Charlotte. His face was a heartbreaking mix of pure happiness and utter fear as tears poured down his face. While James held his newborn granddaughter, his own daughter was fighting for her life on the operating table. Tori finally regained consciousness 48 hours later in the intensive care unit. The room was dim, and the only sound was the constant, rhythmic beeping of machines. Her body felt like a stranger to her. The slightest movement sent a shock of pain through her. Her eyes slowly came into focus on a small bassinet that stood beside her bed. Inside, her daughter Charlotte was fast asleep. She was perfectly formed, impossibly small, and just within reach. With a trembling hand, Tori reached out. She could just manage to touch her fingertips to Charlotte's tiny hand through the clear plastic side of the bassinet. They were the smallest fingers she had ever seen, and they were warm and real. Her daughter was safe. But Tori was too fragile and weak to lift her. A maze of drainage tubes, intravenous lines, and wires tethered her to the bed, a prisoner of her own recovery. For the first 2 days of Charlotte's life, her mother's only touch came through the bars of a hospital crib. Tori could not hold her, feed her, or do any of the simple things a new mother dreams about. This was the real price of Derek's cruelty. It was not about lost money or a damaged reputation. It was about these precious first moments that had been stolen from a mother and her child. And just when it seemed things could not get any worse, another crisis appeared in the doorway. Her lawyer, Catherine Mills, walked in on the morning of the third day. Her expression was heavy with concern. "Tori, I have some terrible news," she began. "What happened?" Tori asked, her voice faint and rough. Catherine took a deep breath to compose herself. Derek's lawyers filed an emergency motion. They deliberately avoided Judge Brennan and went to a new judge. They are claiming your medical crisis is proof that you are physically unfit to care for a baby. They are petitioning the court to grant temporary custody to Margaret Ashford. Tori could only look at her lawyer, unable to process the words. She was lying in an intensive care unit, connected to tubes and machines. She had nearly died from blood loss. She had not even been strong enough to hold her own child. "We have 24 hours to file a response," Catherine said. Then, later on that same day, the situation got even worse. Her friend Gregory Whitman was discovered in a parking garage. He had been beaten until he was unconscious. His laptop, which contained all of their backup evidence against Derek, was missing. An anonymous caller told the police it was a simple mugging, but everyone involved knew that was a lie. Derek might have a restraining order and be facing criminal charges. But he still had allies. He still had people willing to beat a man into a coma and steal evidence on his command. Tori lay in her hospital bed, unable to walk or even embrace her own baby. Her close friend was in a coma in the same hospital, and a judge she had never met was seriously considering taking her daughter away. She saw her father pacing in the hallway just outside her room. He looked more broken than she had ever seen him. A nurse, who was her friend Becca, gently pushed Charlotte's bassinet closer, right next to the bed where Tori could reach. Tori carefully reached her fingers through the plastic slats to stroke Charlotte's hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around her own. They were warm and incredibly tiny, but her grip felt like the strongest thing in the world. "I beat him in court," Tori whispered to her daughter. "I had all the evidence, I had a court order, but it did not matter. He is still trying to hurt us." Tori's voice was filled with despair as she added quietly, "He is never going to give up." Catherine's voice cut through the quiet. "Then we will not give up either." She set her briefcase on the bedside table and took out a laptop and a stack of documents. "Can you sign your name?" she asked Tori. Tori looked down at her unsteady hand. "I do not think I can even hold a pen." "We will find a way," Catherine replied with absolute certainty. "We have 24 hours, and we are going to fight for every single minute." Right there in that hospital room, Catherine began to build their defense. She typed at a furious pace while Tori, fighting through the pain, dictated her side of the story. The core of their argument was powerful and tragically simple. Mr. Ashford used so much force when he choked his wife that he caused severe internal damage. The damage is the direct reason she had life-threatening problems during childbirth. He is now trying to use the consequences of his own violent act to argue she is an unfit mother. This court will not permit an abuser to gain from the very injuries he inflicted. The new judge wanted to hear the whole story for himself. He set up an emergency hearing for the very next morning. Catherine managed to get approval for Tori to join by video call from the intensive care unit. Later that evening, her father, James, slipped into her hospital room. He gently shut the door. "I have some news," he whispered. "It's from Diane's people. It seems this new judge has a financial connection to Derek's family." He went on to explain he was an early investor in one of Derek's side projects. "We can use this conflict of interest to get him removed from the case." Tori looked at her father's determined expression, then at her daughter Charlotte sleeping peacefully in the bassinet. "No," she said, her voice sounding surprisingly firm. "Dad, that is precisely how Derek works. He manipulates the system and uses his influence to get what he wants. If we start playing his game, we become just like him." "This is not about being like him, Tori. This is about making sure you win." "It is about both," she replied. "Someday Charlotte will be old enough to ask me about this. She will want to know how I fought for her. I need to be able to look her in the eye and say I did it with integrity. I have to tell her that I did not turn into the same kind of monster I was fighting." James stared at his daughter for a long, quiet moment. Here was this woman, in a hospital bed, who could barely sit up on her own. This woman had nearly given her life to bring her baby into the world. She was fighting for that child from inside an intensive care unit, and the person trying to take the baby from her was the one who put her there in the first place. The custody hearing began at 9 in the morning. Inside the courtroom, Derek's legal team presented their argument. They insisted that Tori was in no physical condition to care for her child. They said that the baby, Charlotte, required a stable environment. They proposed that Derek's mother, Margaret Ashford, should be appointed the temporary guardian. Derek himself was not present. His seat at the plaintiff's table was completely empty. His lawyers informed the judge he had scheduling conflicts. The man who was demanding custody of his newborn child did not even have the decency to attend the hearing. Then, a video screen flickered to life on the large monitor in the courtroom. Tori's face appeared. She was pale, dressed in a hospital gown, and an intravenous line was visible in her arm. Beneath her blankets, you could make out the outline of drainage tubes. Have you ever heard a story of such injustice that you were desperate for the underdog to win? This is one of those stories. Inside the intensive care unit, the machines beeped in a steady, calm rhythm. A woman was lying in the hospital bed, and right next to her the corner of a baby's bassinet was visible. From his bench, the judge saw a brand new mother who had almost died while giving birth. He saw the man whose violence had directly caused her condition, a man now attempting to take her child away. He saw a mother battling for her baby from her hospital bed, while the father had sent lawyers in his place. Tori asked the judge for permission to speak, and he granted it. "Your Honor," she began, her voice weak but unwavering. "3 days ago, I nearly died bringing my daughter into this world. My husband caused my injuries. He tried to choke me when I was 8 months pregnant." A stunned hush fell over the entire courtroom as she stopped to take a difficult breath. "I'm speaking to you right now from a bed in the intensive care unit," she continued. "I have not yet been able to hold my own baby. I have not slept for 3 days. But I am here. I will always be here for her because that is what mothers do. My husband is not here. He sent his attorneys to do his work for him. He always has other people face the things he is too scared to handle. And that is the difference between him and me. I show up when things are difficult, and I show up when I am scared. I show up even when my body is broken and I am surrounded by beeping hospital equipment. I show up when I am not even strong enough to stand on my own. I show up because my daughter is counting on me, and I can promise you, I will never, ever stop showing up for her." The courtroom was absolutely silent. The judge glanced at Derek's empty chair. His gaze then returned to the video monitor, to Tori, to her battered body and her fierce spirit. He had made his choice. The motion is denied. Victoria Ashford will retain full custody. 3 days after that, Gregory Whitman opened his eyes in his own hospital room, located just 2 floors below Tori's. The very first words he spoke to the police officer sitting by his bed were, "Cloud backup." He clarified, "Everything is saved online. The password is my daughter's birthdays written out." The laptop that had been stolen was worthless. Gregory had already made copies of every single file. He had uploaded them to a secure server long before he ever handed the computer to James. Every last email, every financial transfer, and every offshore account number was safe. It was all the evidence they would ever need to prove Derek had stolen $210 million from his own company. Derek's associates had the computer, but they had missed the information completely. The Securities and Exchange Commission was now in possession of everything. What followed was the complete collapse of the empire Derek Ashford had created. And at the very same time, it was the start of rebuilding everything he had tried to destroy. In the first 2 weeks of Charlotte's life, Tori was finally given permission to go home. She spent her first night at her father's house, with Charlotte sleeping peacefully in her arms. She held her little girl for hours and hours. She did not sleep at all. She was not even feeling tired. She just wanted to feel the wonderful weight of her child on her chest, to feel her warmth, her gentle breathing, and her tiny heartbeat. Federal agents arrived at the main offices of Ashford Innovations. They seized every computer and took all the financial documents. They interviewed every single person who worked there. They started to build a legal case that would take months to bring to trial, but it only took a moment for the world to learn the truth. Derek Ashford was a complete fraud. Within the first 2 months, every single one of Derek's offshore bank accounts was frozen. The banks were legally required to hand over all his transaction records. The amount of evidence against him was overwhelming. In just 5 years, he had successfully stolen $210 million. He had falsified the company's financial statements and lied to everyone, from his investors to the government. Around this same time, Tori made a call to the nonprofit organization where she had worked before. She asked them if there was any chance she could have her old position back. They hired her immediately. She started working part-time so she could still care for her newborn baby. She was also still healing from major surgery and was building her life again from the very beginning. In the 3rd and 4th months, the company's board of directors called an emergency session. The first vote to remove Derek as the chief executive officer was 7 against 5. It was not enough to get rid of him. They needed a larger majority. Derek immediately began calling the 5 board members who had supported him. He told them the investigation was nothing serious and would be over very soon. He promised them the company's stock value would recover. He swore that he had done absolutely nothing wrong. But another woman, Diane Sullivan, also started conversations with those same 5 board members. She arranged private meetings with every one of them. She calmly laid out all the personal legal troubles they would face if they continued to back a chief executive officer who was the subject of a federal investigation. She explained in great detail how their own personal assets could be seized. She showed them how their reputations would be ruined in the news. She warned them that all of their business associates would abandon them. The second vote was 10-2. Derek Ashford was fired from his position as chief executive officer of the company that his own father had founded. 2 security guards escorted him from the building. As he was leaving, every single employee stood up from their desks in total silence, just watching him go. They watched the man who threw laptops at interns and yelled at his assistants walk out for the very last time. Tori was promoted to a director role at her job. Her first paycheck was not enormous, but she used it to buy a crib for her daughter, Charlotte. It was a beautiful wooden crib, which she set up in her very own apartment that she paid for with her own money. Over the following 2 months, the government took possession of absolutely everything Derek owned. They seized his luxury penthouse in Manhattan and his massive estate in the Hamptons. They took his mountain lodge in Aspen, his private yacht, and his entire collection of expensive cars. His art collection, which was valued at $30 million, was sold off at an auction. Every single dollar was used to repay the people and companies he had stolen from. His creditors began to call. His former business associates sued him. Past employees filed lawsuits detailing how he had managed a workplace built on fear. The legal fees became so large that they consumed any money the government had not already taken. In the end, his own lawyers quit, stating that he never paid them and was an impossible client. Derek was left with a public defender to represent him in his criminal trial. At that very same time, Tori was signing the lease for a one-bedroom apartment. It was small and very simple. The kitchen was a tiny little space where only one person could stand at a time. The tiny closet in her new bedroom was a completely different world from the enormous walk-in closet she once shared with Derek. Instead of a view of a sparkling city skyline, her window now faced a simple brick wall. But she had picked out every single thing in this new apartment. The couch was a comforting shade of blue. The chairs in the kitchen were a cheerful yellow, and a bookshelf was filled with storybooks for her daughter Charlotte. A silver-framed photograph of her mother sat on her dresser. This small home belonged to her and only her. It was then that a woman named Amber Collins decided to make a phone call. She called Tori, and the whole secret story came out. Just as Tori had always been afraid of, Derek had been tracking every move Amber made. He had slowly destroyed her confidence, criticizing her friends, her job, and how she looked. He even used the same scary words he had used on Tori. "Look what you made me do." Amber had saved financial records that showed every single dollar Derek had spent on her using his company's money. He paid for her apartment lease with funds from his business. He bought her expensive jewelry with the company credit card. He even paid for their secret trips with money taken straight from corporate accounts. With all of this new evidence, federal investigators added many more charges against Derek. There was more fraud and more theft. With every new piece of proof, the case against him became stronger, and his chances of getting away with his crimes disappeared. For the very first time in her life, Tori went to a support group for survivors of domestic abuse. In the quiet basement of a church, 15 women were sitting together in a circle. Tori made the choice to tell them her story. She did not share every last detail, but she told them the parts that truly counted. "I was one of the very fortunate ones," she said. "My father had money, which is something most women in this situation do not have. He spent every last cent he had to help me fight my abuser. Not everybody has that kind of support." "So what are we supposed to do?" a woman asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You have to save yourself," Tori replied. "I know that sounds completely impossible right now. I know how worn out and terrified you are. But you start with one small step. You call a hotline. You tell just one person the truth. You put $1 into a secret bank account that he does not know exists. You take one single step in the direction of your own freedom." She gazed at the faces in the circle and saw her own fear reflected back at her. "The door was never actually locked," she said softly. "I was the one who locked myself in that prison. I stayed because I was just so unbelievably scared. But I have learned that being free and scared is much, much better than being trapped and scared." Then one evening, her phone buzzed with a call she never could have predicted. The name on her screen was Margaret Ashford, Derek's mother. It was late, and her daughter Charlotte was fast asleep. Tori almost let the call go. "Victoria, please, I am begging you, do not hang up." "What is it that you want from me?" Tori asked, her voice like steel. "The anonymous tip," Margaret said. "The phone call that told you about Derek's secret bank account. That call was from me." A long, heavy quiet filled the space between them. Tori found a chair and slowly lowered herself into it. "I just could not bring myself to face him in that public setting," Margaret confessed, her voice starting to shake. "I was absolutely terrified. But I knew I could at least show you where to go." "Why did you not do something more?" Tori questioned. "Because for 30 years I was married to a man just like him. Derek's father was cruel to me for 3 decades. I began to believe that it was normal. I learned to just accept it. Without saying a single word, I showed my son that this is how men are supposed to express love. That was the lesson I taught him. By the time I understood what a monster I had helped make, it was much too late." Margaret was now sobbing, completely overcome. "I made a monster. I can see it so clearly now. I am finally getting professional help. I am in therapy and attend support groups. I am trying to understand how I let myself become that person." "That does not undo what you did," Tori said, vividly recalling the moment Margaret called her unstable on national television. No, Margaret whispered. Nothing ever will. Tori did not forgive her. But for the first time, she truly understood her. Margaret was a mirror image of the woman Tori could have become. If she had stayed for another 10 years or 20 or even 30, she would have transformed into a woman so submerged in a world of cruelty that she could no longer recognize it. A woman who would pass her pain onto her own child like a dark inheritance. The supervised visit was scheduled for a Tuesday. The meeting took place in a bland government building with security cameras positioned in every corner. The fluorescent lights above hummed with a low buzz. A social worker named Linda sat near the door watching everything. Tori was at a table with Charlotte on her lap. Her daughter was now 4 months old. She was a bright and inquisitive baby, always reaching out her little hands to explore her surroundings. When Derek walked into the room, Tori could hardly recognize him. He had lost a dramatic amount of weight. His hair was unkempt. The inexpensive suit he had on seemed to hang off his small frame. His face was thin and drawn, with dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked 10 years older than he did at that fancy company party. He had already been found guilty of his crimes. The trial lasted for 2 weeks, and the proof against him was impossible to deny. Tori had testified. She took the witness stand and shared her story in a voice that was steady and strong. She revealed the faint scars on her neck to the jury. She looked them right in the eyes and told them the complete truth, down to every single detail. She talked about everything she'd been made to hide for 3 long years, and the jury believed her. They convicted him on all charges. His sentencing was only a week away. Derek's eyes went straight to Charlotte. A hint of sadness flickered across his face. It could have been sorrow, or maybe it was real remorse, or perhaps he was only beginning to grasp the true depth of what he had lost. "She is beautiful," he said, his voice scratchy. "Can I hold her?" "No," Tori answered plainly. "Victoria, please, she is my daughter as well. I only want to hold her for a single minute." "You tried to end her life," Tori stated in a calm, flat voice. "When your hands were around my neck, you were attempting to end both of our lives. You do not have the right to hold her." Derek's jaw tightened. Tori knew that expression. It was the anger that always simmered just before he erupted. But in this place, he had no power. The cameras were capturing his every action. Linda, the social worker, was observing him closely. Security guards were stationed just beyond the door. All of his control was gone. "I'm sorry," Derek said. "It was all of it. The pressure was just overwhelming. From work, from my family. I was not myself." Tori's voice was as cold and unyielding as steel. "Stop. You are not allowed to say that." "Say what?" he asked, with a confused look. "Make excuses. Blame your behavior on other people. Act like you are a different person." "This is who you are, Derek, the man who hurled objects at me, the man who twisted my arm. You are the man who isolated me from my friends and my family, the man who tried to choke me when I was pregnant with your child. That is the person you truly are." "I was sick," he pleaded. "I needed to get help from a professional." "You are not sick. You are a bully," Tori declared simply. There is a very important difference. People who are sick want to get better. They take responsibility for what they do. They put in the effort to change. You never did any of that. Even here and now in this room, you are still just finding excuses. "You have absolutely destroyed my life," he muttered. "No," Tori replied. "You destroyed your own life. Every single awful thing that is happening to you right now is the consequence of choices that you made. My father paid $800 million just to ruin me." "My father paid $800 million to keep me safe," Tori corrected him. "To keep Charlotte safe. Because that is what real love is. You do not have a clue what love is, Derek. You think love is about controlling someone and having power and owning another person, but that is not love in any way. Love is about putting someone else first. It is about protection. It is about placing another person's safety and happiness before your own." Tori adjusted Charlotte gently in her lap. Her daughter was reaching for a little toy on the table. She showed no interest at all in the man on the other side. "By the time you get out of prison," Tori told him, "Charlotte will be a grown woman, and she will know precisely the type of man you are, and she will know everything that you did. She will be the one to decide if she wants any relationship with you. That will be her choice to make, not mine and not yours." Derek jumped up from his chair so fast that it scraped loudly on the floor. Linda, the social worker, shifted forward as the guards outside the door tensed up. "I cannot do this," he said angrily. He turned sharply and marched out of the room. The door swung shut behind him with a final, empty sound. Tori left the building and walked into the warm glow of the afternoon sun. Becca was waiting for her there, leaning on her car. "So how are you feeling?" she asked. Tori gave the question some real thought. She thought she would feel triumphant, or that justice had won, or perhaps just happy. But she did not feel any of those things. Instead, she just felt lighter. It was like a huge burden she had been carrying for years had simply vanished. A burden she was so used to she had forgotten it was even there. "I feel nothing," she said, "and it is an absolutely amazing feeling." A week later, her phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. It read, 25 years. A second message followed. Attempted murder, embezzlement, and intimidating a witness. He has to serve the sentences back to back. It is finally, truly finished. Tori did not go to the courthouse to hear the sentencing. She was at the park with her baby, Charlotte. She was 7 months old now, crawling in the grass and picking small dandelions. She made cheerful little sounds at the birds flying overhead. Tori read the message, then put the phone back in her pocket. She gave the swing a gentle push, and Charlotte let out a delighted laugh. The sound was so clean and full of joy, filled with everything that really matters in life. That evening, long after Charlotte had gone to sleep, Tori sat on the sofa in her small apartment. She turned on her phone's voice recorder and started to speak. She was creating a recording for Charlotte, for the day she would be old enough to have questions about her father, when she was old enough to know the entire story. "Hello, my sweet daughter. If you are hearing my voice, it means you are old enough to know the truth about me, about your father, and about all the things that happened. This is what you should know. Your father made a choice to be a hurtful person. His behavior was not because of pressure from his job or his family or anything on the outside. He was mean because he chose to hurt the people he said he loved. That was his choice. It was not my fault, and it is definitely not your fault. It was all on him. I was with him for 3 years. I kept making excuses for how he acted. I overlooked every single warning sign that was right there in front of me. I really believed that I could be the one to change him. I thought my love would be powerful enough to mend what was broken. But I found out that love by itself cannot fix someone who does not want to change. I also learned that asking for help is not a sign of being weak. It is a true sign of being strong. Your grandfather, along with Becca, Dr. Hoffman, Catherine, Marcus, Gregory, and many others, helped me to get away. I could not have found my way to freedom on my own, and there is no shame in admitting that. The moment I stopped needing his permission to save myself was the moment I became truly free. You have no responsibility for the things your father did. His choices do not control who you are or the person you will become. You are the one who is in charge of your own life, and I will not ever let anyone in this world make you feel like you are anything less than important. I will raise you to be sure of yourself, to say what you think, and to be 100% you with no apologies. That is the lesson that my own mother taught me, and it is the same exact gift I am giving to you now. She ended the voice recording and saved the file to her computer. She knew that in the years to come she would add more and more to it, creating a full and truthful history. She would never soften the truth or hang on to any anger. The recordings would only hold the facts, the simple reality of what happened, and all the love that was in her heart. In a prison cell 500 miles away, Derek Ashford sat on a hard metal bunk and stared at a bare, gray concrete wall. The room was just 6 feet wide and 8 feet long. The only light came from a single fluorescent strip on the ceiling that made a constant humming sound. He was dressed in a bright orange jumpsuit. He had no pictures on the wall and no mail to read. Nobody ever came to visit him. The balance of his bank account was exactly $0. His company was gone. His beautiful houses had disappeared, his collection of cars, his boat, his art, his expensive tailored suits, his secret phone, his private jet, and his name in huge letters on a building. every single piece of it had vanished. 25 years stretched out in front of him like a long, empty road. 25 years of concrete walls, terrible food, buzzing lights, and total silence. He would close his eyes, and the one memory that always surfaced was from that supervised visit. A terrible man tried to tear a family apart, but he underestimated the strength of a mother's love. This is a story about a woman who fought back against pure evil and the price her family paid for justice. You will want to stay until the very end to see how it all turns out. On the other side of a table, Derek watched his daughter, Charlotte. She was only 4 months old, sitting on Tori's lap and reaching for a colorful little toy. She never once glanced in his direction. Charlotte had no idea who he was. She did not know that the strange man looking at her was her father. By the time he was released from prison, she would be a 25-year-old woman, and by then, she would know everything. She would have seen the news stories and read the court documents. She would have heard the recording of her mother's voice. She would know exactly what kind of man her father was and all the terrible things he had done. And at that moment, she would decide for herself what she thought of him. At that very same time, across the city in a small apartment, Charlotte was using the coffee table to pull herself up. She had been trying to do this for days. A monster had attempted to ruin her family, but inside their quiet living room, Tori was watching a little miracle. Her daughter was fighting her own small battle. She would grip the table's edge, push as hard as she could, and stand for a shaky second before tumbling back onto the soft carpet. But each time she fell, she got right back up to try again. This was not a baby who cried when she got frustrated. This was a baby who would simply smile and start all over. On the apartment walls, framed photos told a new story, a story built on love. A photo album was filled with pictures of a new life, surrounded by people who cared. In one photo, Tori's mother held a tiny Charlotte, her face shining with pure love. In another, James held his new granddaughter, his eyes filled with tears of absolute joy. A different picture showed their friend, Becca, making silly faces which made baby Charlotte burst into happy laughter. Even their family doctor, Dr. Hoffman, was in a photo, smiling warmly during Charlotte's first checkup. But one person was completely missing from all of those pictures. There was not a single photograph of Derek anywhere. Tori sat on the floor watching her determined little girl. Suddenly, her phone on a table nearby lit up. It was a text message from her lawyer, Catherine. The message was short. The appeal was denied. The sentence is final. 25 years. It was really and truly over. Tori placed her phone face down and turned back to her daughter. Charlotte grabbed the coffee table, pulled her body up, and wobbled for a moment, but this time she found her balance. She stood there, strong and steady. She looked directly at her mother, and a huge, happy, and fearless smile spread across her face. And then she took her very first step. That single little step was purchased for $800 million. James Caldwell used every cent he had. Every single dollar he earned over 30 years building his company from nothing was spent to dismantle the life of the man who tried to destroy his daughter. Whenever anyone asked him if the price was worth it, his answer was always the same. He would simply say that the money was never his to begin with. It had always belonged to her. Derek Ashford went to prison a broken man. He had no money, no business, no family, and no legacy to speak of. The only thing he had to look forward to was 25 years surrounded by cold, hard walls. He would have to spend all that time knowing his daughter was growing up in a home that belonged to another man. As for Victoria Caldwell, she took back her own name on the day her divorce was finalized. She returned to being the person she was always meant to be. The woman who ran marathons to raise money for people in need. The woman with principles that could not be broken. The woman who volunteered her time to help those who were struggling. The woman who was no longer afraid to live in the world. She made a quiet promise to herself that she would never again let someone have the power to make her feel small. And she would devote her life to making sure her daughter would never have to learn that same difficult lesson. Our team has put a lot of care into researching, writing, and creating this story to share a valuable lesson about life. We make every story to give you entertainment, hope, and strength. We truly believe that stories can make the world a better place, and we promise to always bring you content that matters. Thank you for being such a wonderful and supportive part of our community.